Oh hey, this is Trav. Today I'm going to teach you how to cut up a deer at your own home. You might think it's bloody and gross, but it's really not. If you can cut up a chicken from the grocery store, you can cut up an animal at home. It doesn't matter if it's a big game animal or a domestic animal. Breaking it down into parts and pieces is all about the same. We've all heard horror stories about taking your game into the processor, and you really never know if you get your own animal back. So by cutting up an animal at your own home, you ensure you get your own meat back, you save a lot of money, and you have the satisfaction of having done it yourself. You got it rolling?
Yeah, go.
Awesome. So the way I look at it is you're taking an animal and you're breaking it down into quarters, and to edible portions. And then you're taking those quarters and you're breaking them into muscle groups. And then from there, you're cutting them down even further into steaks, or stew meat, or fajita meat, or even grinding it up into burger or sausage. Then we cook it and our teeth break it down even further into nutrients that our body then uses for energy.
So is it hard to do?
No, anybody can do it. You don't need very fancy equipment at all, and it's a great activity for the family. There's a real push today for local sourcing of meat and vegetables. It doesn't get any more local than hunting your own animal. Free range, hormone and antibiotic free. Now I usually hang my venison, my antelope, my elk, whatever game I've harvested for somewhere between 5 to 7 days. You can go 8 to 10 as long as the temperature is down in that 34 to 37 degree range. But just know that as you're aging your game, it's losing moisture. It definitely improves the flavor the longer you hang it, but the actual size of the portions of meat will decrease a little bit the longer you age it. You'll sometimes start to see some casing on the outside of the meat, and that's completely normal. Casing is where the meat gets a little bit darker, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. The three things that'll spoil your game meat faster than anything else are dirt, heat, and moisture. So the first thing I do when I harvest a big game animal is I field dress it right on the spot to remove any contaminants. Then I skin it, and this starts the cooling process. Some people will argue that if you leave the hide on, it keeps it from casing over, and it will cool just the same with the hide on. And that is true as long as your temperature is in that 34 to 37 degree range. But if it's warm out at all, you want to get that hide off immediately to begin the cooling process. Now you never want to put your meat into plastic bags. That will hold the heat and the moisture and cause it to spoil. So I like to use cloth game bags or even pillowcases, which not only allow the meat to cool, but they protect it from dirt and from flies. Eventually you're going to quarter your animal down into edible portions, which are the 2 hind quarters, the 2 front shoulders, the 2 back straps, and the 2 tenderloins. Some areas also require that you bring out neck meat or even rib meat. Seldom, if ever, are internal organs required as edible portions, but you can definitely bring out the heart and liver, kidneys, and eat those later on as well. The tenderloins are the easiest part of the whole animal. We don't have to do anything except eat these for dinner tonight. Today's episode of Outdoors with Trav, we're just going to do half the deer. I'm going to show you 1 back strap, 1 front shoulder, and 1 hind quarter. And of course you would just double that to do the whole thing. So for starters, let's cut up this back strap. Lay it out on a cutting board. I like to cut nice thick steaks. You'll notice on the back of the back strap is what's called a silver skin. That's okay, we just cut right through that. Now the next step is I take my cellophane, my plastic wrap, tear off a couple of sheets, just lay them down flat on the table. Then I reach for my freezer paper and do the same thing. Transfer them over onto the plastic wrap. It's as easy as that. Just wrap it with the plastic. Try to squeeze all the air out that you can. Same thing over here. Squeezing that air out as you go. Now here's a step I want to include. I take some masking tape, roll out a long strip. I just take scissors and cut off a piece of that tape, and I cut it into short pieces, about 1.5 inches long each. Now I just lay each one of those wrapped packages of steak in my butcher paper. And this butcher paper has a shiny wax lining, okay? You can wrap your meat just in the paper, but I like to include the additional step of using the plastic wrap because this keeps air off of your meat and prevents freezer burn. Now I just take the butcher paper, same as the plastic, I roll it up nice and tight. Okay, I reach over for one of my pieces of masking tape, put a piece right there where the paper comes together. I just fold one end. Again, as I'm folding the paper over, I'm pressing any air that might be inside out. Especially on this last wrap, I squeeze any air out as best I can. Fold the paper into a point, fold it back on itself, and tape it off, just like that. Now it's ready for labeling. And just like that, we've got 2 packages of beautiful backstrap steaks. Here's the front shoulder, and again, this could be any animal. It's all gonna break down the same. When I cut up a front shoulder, I see it as 3 portions. The chuck, or the tender over here, the shoulder itself, and the shank meat. Let's start off by removing the chuck, or the tender. This is the front shoulder bone, the scapula, and there's a bone ridge right here that I'm going to follow with my knife. Cut right along like that. I'm going to turn this around and I'm going to fillet this meat right off the bone. Just trim it right off of there, following the edge of that shoulder bone. All right, there's the chuck or the tender. I'm gonna set that aside right here. And now let's remove the shoulder itself. Most of the time I'll eat this as a roast, but you can also grind it. Again, that bone right there we're gonna follow. Okay, trim that off of there. Turn this around again. Now with the meat separated from the bone there, I can get right down in there and fillet this shoulder off of the bone. See how that's coming off of there so nicely? Turn that a little bit. Again, we're going to follow the back side of this bone all the way around. Now I'm filleting the meat right here off of the humerus itself, right off of that leg bone. Excellent. There's that beautiful shoulder roast removed off of the front quarter. I'll set that right there. And lastly is the shank meat. This is a rougher cut of meat that you can cook it up stovetop, but I much prefer to grind this into burger, as I'll show you later on. I'll go ahead and trim all the shank meat here off the bone. And that's again where I like a little bit shorter knife that I can work with rather than a longer knife for cutting steaks. Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to take this beautiful shoulder roast, set it right over here on the plastic wrap, and then I'm going to take the chuck or the tender, and the shank meat and put them on this plate. I'm going to set these aside. Cover them with a piece of plastic wrap. I'm going to put these in the fridge, and what we're doing here is we're going to build up a pile of meat that we're going to later turn into ground venison. Okay, let's wrap this front shoulder roast. Okay, next we're going to cut up the hind quarter of this animal. Now I like to break it down into 6 muscle groups. We've got the rump, or the rump roast, the sirloin, this is the top round, the eye of round, here's that shank meat out on the leg, and if we roll it over, this big muscle group right here is the bottom round. And personally, those are my favorite steaks off the entire animal. So when it comes to game meat, just remember that the fat marbling that you're used to in beef is not necessarily something you want to have in your game meat. It's a much more lean animal, and you don't want to see that fat in your steaks or roasts. So oftentimes that's trimmed off. So some of this up on here may or may not be an issue. As far as the fat goes, a lot of times I will trim that off. But let's start by breaking it down in the order I talked about before. Let's look at the rump roast right here, and just take and trim this right off. And just like that, we've got a beautiful piece of rump roast meat. I'm going to set that right there. Now, this top round, this muscle group right here, I'm going to separate from the sirloin by following this line right here that you can see. Okay? I just insert the tip of my knife and follow that down just like that. Then I can get my fingers in there and separate these 2 muscle groups. I'm just cutting that membrane between the muscle groups. Just like that, we've separated the sirloin from the top round. Follow that all the way back. Okay. Just turn this. I'm going to get right down in here and just keep following that muscle group, separating it. Cut this right on the front. And this muscle group, top round and eye of round, I'm going to take those off together. Separating them from the bottom round, just like so. Beautiful. Now I'll take this, remember this was sitting like so, top round, eye of round. I'm going to flip it over, and you can see that eye of round, that beautiful piece of meat. Okay, I'm going to separate the 2 right down that seam. Perfect, just like that. Rump roast, eye of round, top round. Now we'll come back to the hind quarter. Let's go ahead and let's remove this sirloin. I'm going to turn it so you can see here. This is connected to the femur. I just need to follow this with my knife. Get the tip of your knife right in there until you can feel that femur bone and separate that muscle from the bone. I just keep following it right around, trimming that meat as close to the bone as you can. Flip this over. You can see where this sirloin meets right up with the bottom round. We're going to separate it. And just like that, we've got a beautiful sirloin. Now I could wrap this up as a roast, or I can cut this into sirloin steaks. For now, let's set that right there. Now we've got this bottom round muscle group. Again, this is my favorite portion of meat. We're just going to go ahead and just cut it off right here above the shank meat. Come right over to that femur bone, continue to follow that around with the tip of the knife. We're just separating off this bottom round from the rest of the leg here. And just like that, beautiful bottom round portion of meat. Set that right there. Let's come back. We're gonna get this ball, this calf meat, and this meat on the foreleg is all gonna be shank meat that we're gonna later grind. Again, I'm just trimming the shank meat right off the bone. This is a rougher cut of meat. I prefer to grind it. And this just comes off so nicely. Look at the color of that meat, is wonderful. Set that right there. Flip this over and take off this shank meat from the foreleg. Again, we're following the bone here. You see this has a lot of tendon and such in there. That's why it makes for good grind. Now this shank meat from the hind quarter, I'm gonna add to our shoulder meat off of that front shoulder. I'm gonna go cover this with cellophane and go put this in the fridge. Now let's cut up these beautiful bottom round steaks. The thickness of the steak is up to you. I take a nice long carving knife and I cut my steaks about 3/4 of an inch thick. And I go the full length of the roast, the top round. Again, I'm gonna cut it into steaks. This time, maybe just a little bit thicker, about an inch thick each steak. This one I'll just make into 6 nice chunks of meat. Great little steaks for barbecuing. Well, I actually went with 5. These are wonderful on skewers as shish kebabs or steaks themselves. It's a delicious cut of meat, the eye of round. Now let's take the sirloin, and for the sake of time, let's just wrap it as a roast. I'm not gonna cut it up into steaks. This will be a wonderful family over for dinner roast night. If you look at my setup here, this is real simple. We've got the shank meat, I added the rump roast, and we've got the shoulder meat. And I've just got a simple hand grinder. Some people have a really nice KitchenAid or electric grinder, but I just have this hand grinder and it works just fine. Now when I'm grinding my venison into burger, I don't add any fat. I like it the way it is. But some people will go to the butcher and buy some pork or beef fat, and they'll grind it in with their venison. And the thinking here is that it makes not only better flavor, but also a better consistency if you're making patties for the grill. Just gonna feed it right in here to the top of the grinder, and away she goes. Now I'm gonna go ahead and trim this meat off the grinder. Look at that beautiful plate of ground meat. Now some people will take a scale and you can weigh it out, but I'm just gonna eyeball it. Put some burger on that piece of plastic wrap. Come over here. That looks about right. I've got one more over here. We'll dump all that on there. All right, let's wrap up this beautiful venison burger. Again, squeezing the air out just like we did with the steaks. Look at this, with just a few simple tools and relatively little cost, you can cut up your own game meat at home. This is only half a deer. With the other half, we'll be doubling the amount of meat we put in our freezer this year. Well, deer is my favorite animal to hunt.
And why?
Well, number one, because they exist. I feel like Elk are mythical creatures. You either see 75 or you see nothing. But I feel like deer, there's a chance you can get one. That's how you put meat on the table.